Mars, circa 2075. EOS, the leader of the insurgent Red Faction group, was preparing to launch a massive attack against the infamous Ultor Corporation. There was no going back now. They'd finally made a move, after years of planning and talking. With the attack they had done the night before, they were finally committed. Orion, EOS's second-in-command, rigged a bomb. Once he was clear, she hit the alert button outside the cafeteria. When the security guards ran out of their barracks, the blast took out 6 of them. EOS knew that would stir things up. She couldn't think of them as people anymore. There was too much at stake. They worked for Ultor, helping the company kill miners. They were the enemy. Too many of her friends had died to feel pity now. They needed to harden attitudes on both sides, to make conflict inevitable. Once miners realized they had no choice, once they knew their lives depended on defeating Ultor, then they would fight, and they would win. EOS couldn't believe it took them this long. Ultor made them live like animals for years, they'd forgotten they were human. People had been beaten down, physically and mentally, and it was going to take a strong shock to get them back up. EOS was going to provide the juice, even if it killed her. But no matter what, the miners there would never go back to lurching through life like zombies. She was going to make sure of that. Everyone talked about how awful life was on Mars, but no one would do anything about it. They were scared they'd turn up missing at the end of a shift. EOS knew she had to do something. Her father didn't raise any whiners. He clawed his way up through the ranks, starting out chewing rocks in the tunnels, and then eventually became a shift foreman for Sector T2. He worked and fought for everything he had, and she knew she would have to do the same. EOS knew better than to look to her father for approval though. He would have hated what they were doing. Nothing could shake his loyalty to Ultor. Not even her mother's death made him question that. She was one of the early plague victims. Something about the reactions of the docs and techs in the medical facility made her wonder what was really going on. When she died, EOS saw guilt burn across a doctor's face. She started screaming, blaming Ultor for everything. Her father dragged her back to their apartment and locked EOS in her room until she stopped yelling. He refused to hear it. But she knew. EOS just shut up and churned inside. That night, EOS promised herself to rid Mars of Ultor. She had to do it for her mother, for what they did to her, and what they were doing to countless others. It began with getting Orion on board. They'd grown up together and she knew she could trust him. EOS started talking to him, sketching out plans, such as they were. They met up between shifts, in places deserted and crowded, anywhere they thought could avoid attention, always looking over their shoulders. They knew they couldn't do it by themselves, so mostly they talked about who could join them. They had to be sure of everyone they brought in. One slip, one untrustworthy member, and Ultor would have them. Ultor was everywhere, in the mines, with security guards, cameras, bots, listening devices, and monitoring software. EOS even believed they used the maintenance bots to keep tabs on them. The worst were the human spies. No one would have believed anyone would want to spy for Ultor, but some people did. When they uncovered a spy, they would arrange an accident in the mines. It was crude, but effective. The idea of getting rid of Ultor had been the biggest stumbling block. For most people there, Ultor was Mars. They hated the guards, the barracks, the food, the restrictions, everything about life there. But they couldn't see how much better things would be if Ultor were out of their lives. When EOS and Orion spoke about eliminating Ultor, the other miners there would look at them as if they were crazy. EOS was convinced that Ultor had done something to their minds. Orion would say that was just the way people were. If they weren't willing to fight, they would make themselves believe that things weren't so bad after all. Whenever EOS felt like giving up, she thought about her mother and her father. That's all she needed. As the core group grew, it got harder to meet without arousing suspicion. Orion and EOS decided to create a smokescreen of athletic competitions between minor barracks. Each barracks would field one or more teams to meet in weekly contests. They submitted a proposal to Griffin, Ultor's deputy administrator. It made her skin crawl to ask him for something, but he quickly approved the idea. He thought it would boost minor morale. He even insisted that admin run the league. That was fine with EOS. It was pretty funny that Ultor was helping them cover up their activities, and not even knowing it. It was Orion who came up with the name Red Faction for their team. He thought the political sense of faction would have meaning only for them. And the red symbolized that they represented all of Mars. The name clicked with everyone, and Red Faction became the first team to join the new league. Once the league got underway, they met several times a week for training sessions. They coached all the planning in sports terms. This gave a light-hearted feel to a frightening undertaking. The meetings were also less dangerous because Ultor had to spread its monitoring efforts among the many teams in the competitions. Of course, they got clobbered every week in the actual contests, but EOS didn't care. That had the side benefit of preventing anyone from wanting to join their team. Everyone called them Dead Faction. The admins running the league even started listing them that way in the league standings. But EOS and the Red Faction would have the last laugh. They all decided to take on codenames to use within the group. EOS knew that it probably didn't provide all that much protection, but it made them feel a little safer. She knew that keeping the group small would help too. There were 23 of them now, plus a few probational recruits. Few enough to be fairly certain there were no leaks, but more than enough to rally groups of miners against Ultor when the time came. Sometimes it bothered EOS how much the others looked up to her for leadership. She often wondered what would happen if she was captured or killed. She hated the thought of everything falling apart if something happened to her. Orion was the only one with any initiative. Regardless of her doubts, everything was primed for the rebellion to start. All it needed was a spark. And once it got going, they would be there to lead it. For weeks now, EOS and Orion had been blanketing the barracks with pamphlets, condemning Ultor and blaming them for everything wrong on Mars. The writings were signed EOS. She preferred to have them promise the group, from Red Faction, but that would have given them away immediately. Orion also said the miners needed someone to believe in and follow, not another faceless group. Once the rebellion began, everyone was going to know that the Red Faction was the driving force behind it. There would be no more hiding. They had been stockpiling weapons for months. EOS and Orion had quietly stolen weapons from a bunch of weapon lockers, at guard barracks and posts. They had to break into only the first couple they raided. After that, they found the doors unlocked to every post that they tried. The weapon cabinets were unlocked too. It freaked them out the first time it happened. Orion figured that Ultor was onto them, and backed off pretty quickly. But when they found the door to another weapons locker open a few nights later, they took some weapons and boxes of ammo and got out fast. The doors had been unlocked every time since. EOS and Orion still had no idea why. They didn't know if it was Ultor doing it, or someone else, but they were going to grab weapons for as long as they could. The guards wouldn't know the miners were armed until the bullets were coming out the backs of their skulls. They had cached the stolen weapons throughout the mines and barracks. When the rebellion started, Red Faction members would head to the nearest cache and hand out weapons to any miner willing to fight. The security guards were used to bullying unarmed miners. They were in for a big shock. EOS still didn't know what to do about the mercenaries that Ultor had brought there. They were tough, and EOS knew it. The mercs would slice right through them if they went on the offensive too soon. If they moved fast enough, they wouldn't hit them until they'd settled the score with the guards and gotten everyone armed. Their sole advantage was numbers, but EOS didn't want to waste thousands of miners in human wave attacks. The next few days were going to make or break it for them. 5 years of planning and plotting were either going to pay off, or get them all killed. Getting rid of Ultor was the goal for everyone else in the Red Faction. But EOS wanted more. She wanted to know who was behind the plague. And she wanted them to die.